Maybe I was just crazy. Maybe it was the 60s. Or maybe I was just a girl. Interrupted.
Girl Interrupted is a 1999 film written and directed by James Mangold based on the memoir by Susanna Kaysen. Set in the late 1960s, the film follows Susanna, an 18-year-old girl whose life takes an unexpected turn after a suicide attempt leads to her admission to Claremore Psychiatric Hospital. Inside, she meets a group of young women, each dealing with their own mental struggles, ranging from anxiety and OCD to schizophrenia, anorexia, and borderline personality disorder. As Susanna adjusts to life in Claremore, she begins to understand just how complex mental illness really is, how it affects people differently, how it can connect them, and how it can break them. Throughout the course of the film, we watch Susanna navigate her own mind and slowly piece together who she is, gaining the courage to imagine what recovery might look like, even when the world around her has labelled her as broken. But with that being said, how does Girl Interrupted depict mental illness using psychoanalysis? Girl Interrupted can be identified as a film that resists the male gaze, as it challenges traditional film structures that are specifically designed to satisfy male audiences and their pleasure. Traditionally, women are portrayed as objects rather than subjects. Girl Interrupted stands out because it deliberately declines to participate in visual and narrative patterns that are attractive to a male audience. Films of the same era, from American Beauty to Cruel Intentions, often use different camera shots, narratives, and romance to position women as an object of desire or danger. Girl Interrupted is different as it doesn't sexualise bodies or the concept of women in institutions. The camera adopts an unflattering perspective that rejects the sexualisation of vulnerability, which was common during the 90s. When Susanna self-harms, the camera is used in a functional manner, not an aesthetic style where it can be perceived as beautiful suffering. These scenes are presented as emotionally destructive to an audience rather than visually pleasurable. Male characters are also narratively and visually sidelined from psychiatrists, orderlies, and Susanna's boyfriend.
I tried to kill myself, Toby.
What? You took some aspirin.
I took a bottle of aspirin.
Wait, and that buys you a year in this place? Susanna, that's bullshit.
Their characters are used to highlight how the men are incapable of interpreting the women's experiences. Their authority in the film itself is diminished through short scenes simply highlighting their inabilities. Girl Interrupted displaces male power and foregrounds female subjectivity instead. Whilst Girl Interrupted is usually discussed in terms of how it resists the male gaze, it also actively enhances the female gaze. Although the term female gaze has become increasingly more popular in film theory, it still remains a developing theoretical construct, unlike the male gaze, which has been defined by Laura Mulvey with clear psychoanalytic and structural arguments. The female gaze has no singular definition. With this being said, I see Girl Interrupted actively enhances psychoanalytic theory. The film enhances women's subjective experiences and emotional realities. Rather than presenting the women as objects of visual pleasure and desire, the film frames them through their fears, desires, and psychological complexities. Susanna's voiceover and point of view shots situate the narrative firmly with her, allowing the audience to experience events as her character perceives them. The female gaze is most powerful because of the women themselves, their vulnerabilities and emotional complexities drive the narrative. Each character is presented with a significant amount of psychological layers. Susanna's introspection, Lisa's charisma, Daisy's fragility, George's avoidance, and Polly's resilience. They're not simple personality traits or characteristics to add to their characters to further storyline or fill stereotypes. The film shows them with their pure complexity, inviting the audience to empathise with the characters and get a better understanding of their feelings, instead of just watching them as an audience member. The women gaze at each other, and this has a deeper complexity than initially considered. The group study, judge, support, and misread one another in ways that reflect distinctly female experiences of comparison, solidarity, and emotional intensity. These reciprocal gazes create an intersubjective space where female identities form through connection rather than objectification. Several key scenes in Girl Interrupted dramatise Lacan's mirror stage theory by showing Susanna confronting external images of herself that fail to match her inner experiences. The bathroom scenes where she stares at her reflection during moments of disassociation visually represent the mirror stages. Instead of finding a coherent, stable version of herself, she feels disconnected from that reflection. This reflects Lacan's theory that, as she discusses, that the image in the mirror never fully matches our inner reality. There's another scene where Susanna is diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and is labelled with this mental illness, although this does not feel true to Susanna herself.
You are not crazy.
And what's wrong with me? Huh? What the fuck is going on inside my head? Tell me!
The other characters that represent mirrors. Daisy shows Susanna a future shaped by fear and self-destruction, whilst Lisa represents an ideal version of confidence and rebellion that Susanna admires but also fears she cannot amount to. By the end of the film, Susanna's writing becomes a healthier mirror of herself, letting her create her own understanding of herself rather than relying on labels, psychological evaluations, and distorted images of herself portrayed by other people. These scenes reflect how Susanna's identity is built through a series of reflections, some which are misleading and painful, but help her get a better understanding of herself. Girl Interrupted reflects Juliet Mitchell's idea that hysteria is often a way for women to express psychological conflict when they have no other acceptable language for their pain.
That is not fair. That is not fair! That is not fair! 74 is the perfect weight!
Throughout the course of the film, the women's mental health struggles are repeatedly treated as irrational or exaggerated, dismissing the female emotions. Mitchell argues that hysteria appears when society limits how women can speak and behave. Susanna's experiences portray this through her confusion, sadness, and anger, which are interpreted by the doctors as symptoms of her borderline personality disorder, rather than meaningful and valid responses to how she is being treated. The other patients in Claymore reflect different versions of hysteria. Daisy expresses her distress quietly. She is shaped by societal pressure to be perfect, and she is controlled by the closer people in her life. Meanwhile, Lisa expresses her emotions loudly and destructively. She rebels as a form of communication that she is struggling. Their behaviours are not signs of female instability, but a generalised response to the environment they are in and how they are restricted from their own identities and voices. Girl Interrupted shows how these women are misunderstood and constrained by the psychiatric system. The film itself supports Juliet Mitchell's argument that what is labelled as female hysteria is deeply connected to the struggle for women to define themselves in a world that often refuses to listen to them. Lisa's character in Girl Interrupted powerfully illustrates what it looks like when a person's sense of self becomes fragmented and unstable. While she appears confident, fearless, and in control of her emotions, this persona functions more as a defense mechanism than as a genuine expression of identity. Lisa constructs a loud, rebellious exterior to avoid confronting the parts of herself she cannot integrate: fear, abandonment, grief, and vulnerability. Her constant need to dominate others, provoke chaos, and position herself as untouchable reveals a self that is unable to hold all of her conflicting emotions together. Instead of working through her pain, she channels it outward, attacking the weaknesses she sees in others before they're able to expose her own.
You change the scenery, but not the fucking situation, and the warden makes house calls. And everybody knows that he fucks you. What they don't know is that you like it. Probably all you've ever known, huh?
Her interactions with Daisy and Susanna highlight this instability. Lisa mocks Daisy's routines and pushes her around emotionally. Lisa's behaviours show a person that has fractured under the weight of unresolved trauma, using aggression and performing as coping strategies. Unlike Susanna, who eventually begins to rebuild her identity in a more coherent state, Lisa remains trapped in a repeating cycle of defiance and self-protection. The film suggests that Lisa's instability isn't simply a symptom of her diagnosis, it is a result of a self that has never been allowed to feel safe enough or to be vulnerable. In this way, Lisa embodies the destructive potential of a self held together by her own performance rather than her genuine emotional connections. Set in the 1960s, an era where psychiatric practice routinely dismissed women's emotional lives, Girl Interrupted is an emotional rollercoaster, pulling you into a perplexing world of psychiatric care where labels like borderline personality disorder and psychopathy, the generalised diagnosis, is tossed around. The film shows how diagnoses and institutional authority function like external mirrors, imposing identities which rarely match women's inner realities. Although the film was dramatised and filtered through male adaptation, the memoir written by Susanna Kaysen was shaped into a screenplay directed by James Mangold. It still manages to preserve the complexity of the women it portrays instead of exploiting their suffering. The film enhances a female-centred perspective that respects the emotional truth of the memoir. Lisa and Daisy embody different fractures of the self-created environment that limits female autonomy, while Susanna eventually turns to writing to represent the slow rebuilding of a coherent identity of her own terms. Ultimately, Girl Interrupted demonstrates the true harm of the 1960s mental health practices that failed to hear women. The film argues that healing begins when women are finally able to define themselves. In this way, Girl Interrupted ultimately shows that female identity can only be authentically formed when women are free from imposed reflections and allowed to speak their own truth. While some may argue that the film oversimplifies mental health, it captures the overwhelming complexity of navigating one's personal demons whilst trapped within a system that can feel just as disordered.